6 stories, 6 nightmares, each one darker than the last. Are you ready to face them? What would you do if the very place you went to escape the world became the last place you'd ever want to be? For one man in 2020, that's exactly what happened. He thought a quiet trip into the Colorado wilderness would help him clear his head. Instead, he discovered something far more disturbing. Someone was watching him, hunting him, and they weren't planning to stop. This isn't a campfire story or a made-up legend. This is what happens when the shadows in the forest belong to someone who already knows your name. It all started in the middle of the pandemic. The world was locked down, and life for a lot of people had already spiraled out of control. For this man, let's call him Jake, things had gone from bad to worse. He'd lost his job. His reputation had been dragged through the mud, and he was being harassed online by people who seemed to know far too much about him. The constant barrage of calls, texts, and private numbers never stopped. Day and night, it was like someone was trying to break him mentally. So when he finally had the chance to just get away, he grabbed it. He packed up his gear, loaded his tent, and headed out into the Rocky Mountain National Park, far away from cell towers, social media, and the people who wanted to see him suffer. For once, it was just him, the snow-covered trees, and the sound of water trickling through the creek near his camp. And at first, it worked. The cold Colorado air cleared his head. The silence gave him peace. And for the first time in months, Jake felt safe. But it didn't last long. On his very first night, something broke the silence. It wasn't an animal rustling in the distance or a gust of wind shaking the branches. It was his phone, buzzing, lighting up in the middle of the night. He didn't recognize the number, and that's when the pit formed in his stomach. He'd changed his phone. He'd gotten rid of the old SIM card. This wasn't supposed to happen anymore. The message read, "I like your spot. Cozy tent. That little fire by the creek looks nice." Jake froze. His blood turned to ice. He knew what this meant. Someone was out there in the darkness, close enough to see every detail of his campsite. At first, he tried to brush it off as some kind of prank. Maybe a wrong number. Maybe someone messing with him online. But then another message came through. "You shouldn't sleep so close to the water. Hypothermia is no joke." This wasn't a coincidence. This was real. Someone was out there, hiding in the trees, watching. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped out of the tent, shining across the snow, his breath fogged in the freezing air. Nothing, just the endless black between the trees. He walked a circle around his camp, heart racing, his ears straining for any sound. The forest was silent, but when he crawled back into his tent, his phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a text. It was a photo, a picture of his own tent, taken from just a few feet away. That was the moment Jake knew he wasn't imagining it. Somebody was there, and they weren't trying to scare him off. They wanted him to know. The rest of the night was a blur of terror. Every time he thought he heard footsteps crunching in the snow, he whipped his head around, scanning with the flashlight. Nothing. Then came the snapping of twigs, the rustle of fabric, a shadow moving just outside the tent wall. Finally, when the sound of breathing came from directly behind his tent, Jake snapped. He grabbed his gun, pointed into the air, and fired. The shot echoed like thunder across the valley, bouncing from tree to tree. For a split second, silence, and then footsteps, sprinting away. vanishing into the woods. Jake stayed awake until dawn, clutching his gun, waiting for the stalker to come back. But they didn't. When the sun finally rose, the snow was disturbed boot prints, circling his campsite like a predator testing its prey. He never found out who it was. No face, no name, just a cruel reminder that no matter how far into the wilderness you go, you might not be alone. Jake left the mountains that morning and never returned to that creek again. But to this day, he wonders, what if he hadn't brought his gun? What if he hadn't fired that shot? Would he have made it out at all? Because sometimes the scariest thing in the woods isn't the wild. It's the people hiding inside it. That was the night a peaceful camping trip turned into a living nightmare. And it makes you think, how many campers have set up their tents, thinking they were alone, without realizing someone was standing in the dark, just a few feet away? If you were in Jake's shoes, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments. Every family has traditions. For some, it's road trips. For others, it's board games or backyard barbecues. But for one family in Michigan, the tradition was camping. Every October, when the air turned crisp and the leaves caught fire with color, the kids would pitch a tent in the woods near their uncle's property. It was innocent fun, a chance for the cousins to laugh, tell stories, and sneak candy under the stars while the adults stayed back at the house, drinking and joking about how brave the kids thought they were. But one year, the tradition ended. That night changed how those kids saw the forest forever, because the woods didn't just echo their laughter. That night, the woods screamed back. The spot they chose was perfect, or at least it seemed that way at the time, for acres of private forest stretched out behind their uncle's place, close enough to feel safe, but far enough that the kids could pretend they were out in the wild on their own. There were about half a dozen of them that year. Siblings, cousins, all between the ages of 10 and 14. They dragged sleeping bags and snacks into a big canvas tent, zipped it shut, and settled in for the night. Their dads, slightly buzzed from drinking, cheered them on. Don't come running back unless you hear Bigfoot. The kids laughed it off. They weren't scared. Not yet. The first hour was filled with the usual stuff. Ghost stories, flashlight games, arguing over who got the most comfortable spot. Every sound outside the tent, an owl, a branch snapping, was followed by giggles and teasing. Then came the first scream. It was faint, distant, carried on the wind, sharp enough to cut through their laughter. Everyone froze. Someone whispered, "Did you hear that?" Another shrugged. "It's probably a fox. They sound weird at night." The group nodded, trying to convince themselves. But unease had already crept in. Minutes later, it came again, louder this time, closer. It didn't sound like an animal. It sounded human, like someone crying out in pain. The tent fell silent. Every child sat up, wide-eyed, listening. The scream came again, shrill and ragged, rising and falling in a way that no animal they knew could mimic. The oldest cousin tried to be brave. "It's nothing. Just don't think about it." But his voice shook as much as his hands. Then came the sound that shattered their courage. Something slammed into the side of the tent. The thin canvas walls rippled. A low, guttural moan followed. And then, right outside the flap, just inches from their faces, an ear-splitting scream ripped through the night. It was so close they could feel it in their bones. A raw, human howl, full of rage and agony. The tent exploded into chaos. Kids trampled each other trying to get to the zipper. One girl sobbed uncontrollably. Another cousin shouted, "Run! Run!" They spilled out into the freezing night air and sprinted through the trees toward the house, hearts pounding, convinced that whatever was behind them was about to tear them apart. When they burst through the door of their uncle's house, gasping and crying, the adults immediately sobered up. The dads grabbed rifles and flashlights, demanding answers. The kids all shouted at once, describing the screams, the shaking tent, the figure outside. At first, the adults thought it was a prank. Maybe one of the older teens had snuck out to scare the younger ones. But then one of the mothers asked a question that silenced the room. "Where are the girls? Weren't they with you?" The kids shook their heads. The two younger sisters were already asleep in the house. They hadn't been outside all night. So who, or what, had been standing just feet from the tent? The dads stormed into the woods with rifles, flashlights sweeping across the trees. They searched for nearly an hour, but found nothing. No footprints. No prankster hiding in the brush. No trace of anyone at all. Meanwhile, the kids huddled together inside, still shaking, refusing to even look out the window. By morning, the woods were silent again. Calm, ordinary. But the kids knew what they had heard, what they had felt, and no explanation could erase it. The tradition was over. Nobody ever camped outside on that property again. To this day, those kids, now adults, swear the screams were real. Some say it was an animal they couldn't recognize. Others believe it was something far worse. But one thing is certain. When the forest screams back, you don't stick around to find out why. Would you have stayed in that tent, waiting to see what it was? Or would you have run like they did? Tell me in the comments. Some camping trips end with memories. This one ended with a mystery. It was supposed to be simple. A father and son getaway in the mountains of Idaho. A weekend fishing, roasting marshmallows, and spending time together far away from the noise of the world. But when Sunday came, the campsite was empty. The tent stood half-collapsed. The fishing pole still leaned against a tree, and the fire pit was cold. The father and his little boy were gone. And the strangest part? Nobody has ever been able to agree on what really happened out there. The story begins with Michael Turner, a 36-year-old mechanic, and his 7-year-old son, Caleb. Friends say the two were inseparable. Caleb idolized his dad, and Michael would do anything for his son. That summer, Michael had been working long hours. He promised Caleb that when he finally had a free weekend, they'd go camping together, just the two of them, no phones, no distractions. So in late June, they packed the truck with supplies and drove out to a remote part of the Sawtooth Mountains. Michael had camped there as a kid with his own father. He told friends it was a safe place, a spot where he could teach Caleb how to be a man. But it wasn't safe. And by Monday, they were gone. When Michael and Caleb didn't return home, relatives grew worried. At first, they thought maybe he decided to extend the trip. But after calls went unanswered, they contacted the sheriff. A search party set out immediately. They found the campsite less than 24 hours later, tucked between the trees near a riverbank. Nothing looked violent, but something was off. The cooler was still full. The tent had collapsed on one side, as if someone left in a hurry. Their fishing gear was untouched. Caleb's favorite toy truck sat abandoned in the dirt. It looked like they'd simply walked away. But why? That night, rescuers spread out through the woods, calling their names, blasting whistles, even flying helicopters overhead. No response. No sign. Then, on the second day, search dogs picked up a trail. The scent led them about a mile from camp before abruptly stopping in the middle of a clearing. No footprints. No clothing. No blood. Just nothing. It was as if father and son had vanished into thin air. Rumors spread quickly. Some locals whispered about wild animals, but experienced trackers ruled that out. There were no signs of a bear attack, no drag marks, no torn clothing. Others claimed it was foul play, that someone had lured them out there. But again, there was no evidence. Michael had no enemies. Nobody in town believed he'd hurt his own son. And then there were the stranger theories. Several searchers claimed that at night, deep in the woods, they heard a child's voice calling for help. But when they rushed toward the sound, it would always fade, as if moving just out of reach. Others swore they saw lights in the trees, bright, white flashes that vanished the second they looked directly at them. One deputy admitted later that he couldn't explain what he saw. A figure standing on the ridge above the campsite, watching silently. When he blinked, it was gone. Of course, none of this was ever written in the official report. But to the people who were there, something about that search felt wrong. Weeks passed, then months, and finally, the search was called off. No bodies, no evidence, just questions. Michael's family refused to give up. They posted flyers, interviewed psychics, even hired private trackers. Nothing. Caleb's mother, who had been separated from Michael, later said in an interview, "I don't think they're gone. I think something took them." Her words only fueled the speculation. Years later, the case is still unsolved. Some say Michael simply walked away from his life and took his son with him. Others believe they got lost, though seasoned hikers point out that Michael knew those mountains well. But there's another theory. The locals still whisper about the sawtooths being thin in certain places, that the forest itself has doors you're not supposed to open, and that maybe Michael and Caleb found one. To this day, no trace of Michael or Caleb has ever been found. Not a shoe, not a scrap of clothing, nothing. So what really happened that weekend? Did they get lost, or did something far more mysterious occur in those woods? The truth is, we may never know. But if you ever find yourself camping deep in the sawtooths, remember this. Sometimes the forest doesn't give back what it takes. If you were on that search team, what theory would you believe? Tell me in the comments. It was a crisp autumn morning when 29-year-old Tom Alvarez set out on what was supposed to be a quick, refreshing hike through the Adirondack Mountains. Tom wasn't new to the outdoors. He was the kind of guy who always double-checked his gear, carried maps, told people where he was going, and actually kept a plan. Friends would later say he was cautious to the point of being boring. If anyone could survive a weekend in the woods, it was Tom. But by Sunday night, he hadn't come back, and by Monday morning, the Adirondacks were holding on to one of the most chilling disappearances the region had ever seen. Tom had told his girlfriend exactly where he'd be hiking, up the Moose River Trail, a path he'd walked before. He packed light but smart. Food for 3 days, water filters, spare socks, first aid kit. Everything was in order when he left. He promised to text once he had service again. That text never came. When Tom's girlfriend reported him missing, authorities launched a full search. At first, they weren't too worried. People got delayed, lost phone signal, even sprained an ankle and camped an extra night. But something about Tom's case would turn that calm assumption into dread. On the second day of searching, volunteers came across Tom's backpack. It wasn't tossed aside and it wasn't torn up. It was neatly strapped to a tree trunk, chest high, as if someone had carefully placed it there. Inside, everything. Food, water, first aid, flashlight, untouched. It was as if Tom had set down his lifeline in the middle of the wilderness and decided he didn't need it anymore. That was the first red flag. Later that afternoon, another team made a stranger discovery. Less than a quarter mile away, on a patch of soft ground near a creek, stood Tom's boots. Perfectly upright, laces loosened, socks tucked neatly inside. There were no drag marks, no animal tracks, no sign of a struggle. Just boots, sitting in the dirt like Tom had calmly stepped out of them and walked away barefoot. But that's the thing. Tom was cautious. He knew how dangerous those woods could be without proper gear. So why leave it behind? The next day, search dogs picked up a faint scent leading away from a creek. What they found unsettled even the most seasoned trackers. Barefoot prints pressed lightly into the mud. At first, everyone assumed they were Tom's, but they weren't. The prints were too small, much too small. The heel-to-toe length suggested a child's foot no older than 8 or 9 years old. And here's the worst part. Tom hadn't brought a child with him. The prints continued for half a mile before stopping dead in the middle of a clearing. No turnarounds, no other tracks, just gone. As news spread, the theories multiplied. Some said Tom had lost his mind out there, stripping down in a fit of hypothermia, even though it wasn't nearly cold enough for that. Others suspected foul play, that maybe someone else had been with him all along. But if that were the case, why leave his gear behind? Then came the whispers. Local hikers spoke about a strange presence in that part of the trail. Stories of children's laughter at night, echoing through the trees when no kids were around. A ranger once admitted that he'd heard something similar years earlier. Soft giggles followed by the feeling of being watched. No one ever wrote these stories in the official reports, but people who knew the Adirondacks well stopped camping near Moose River. One witness came forward claiming he had seen Tom the day he vanished. He described a man matching Tom's appearance, standing at the edge of the trail around dusk. But the detail that stuck with him was the boy. The man said Tom wasn't alone. He was holding hands with a small child, barefoot, wearing only a thin shirt and staring blankly ahead. When the witness called out, Tom didn't respond. He just turned and walked deeper into the woods with the child at his side. That was the last time anyone ever saw him. Despite weeks of searching, no trace of Tom was ever found. No body, no clothing, no gear beyond the backpack and boots. The official record lists him as missing, presumed dead. But people who live near the trail believe otherwise. Some say Tom is still out there, wandering barefoot with the child who wasn't supposed to exist. Others claim if you camp near Moose River, you might see the same small prints circling your tent at night. Quick, light steps that stop just as you wake up. And if you're really unlucky, you won't just hear the footsteps. You'll hear a child's voice whisper your name. So what really happened, Tom Alvarez? Did he lose his way and vanish into the endless Adirondacks? Or did he follow something or someone into a place we're not meant to go? The truth is, we'll never know. But if you ever find yourself hiking alone in those mountains, remember this. If you see a barefoot child watching you from the trees, don't follow. Because Tom did, and he never came back. In the quiet backwoods of Arkansas, there's a stretch of river that locals warn you not to camp near. By day, it looks peaceful. Shimmering water, tall trees swaying in the breeze, the kind of place families might once have gathered to fish or picnic. But when the sun goes down, the river takes on a different personality. One that whispers and one that waits. They call her the woman at the river bend, and the people who've seen her rarely stay in the woods again. The earliest known story dates back to 1992, when a young couple decided to spend a summer weekend camping along the riverbank. It was an ordinary night. Fire crackling, marshmallows roasting, the sound of water gently pushing against the rocks. But sometime around midnight, they heard singing. It wasn't loud. At first, it was soft and far away, like someone humming a lullaby just out of earshot. The couple assumed it was another group of campers downriver. But as the minutes passed, the singing grew louder and closer. Curious, the boyfriend stepped out of the tent. That's when he saw her. Standing ankle-deep in the river was a pale figure, a woman, her hair long and dark, cascading over her face. She wore what looked like a long white dress, soaked to her knees, clinging tightly to her frame. She didn't move. She didn't look up. She just swayed gently as she sang, a haunting, wordless melody that echoed off the water and drifted straight into the couple's camp. The boyfriend called out, asking if she needed help. She didn't respond. She just raised one thin arm and pointed directly at him. The couple panicked. They grabbed their gear and ran, abandoning their fire and half their belongings. The next morning, still shaken, they returned with friends to prove what they'd seen. But the woman was gone. No footprints. No signs of struggle. Instead, on the sandbar where she had stood, they found dozens of small handprints pressed into the mud. Not footprints. Handprints. As if children had been crawling on their hands and knees, all in one spot, all pressed into the ground around where she'd been. That detail never left them. In the years that followed, other campers told eerily similar stories. A lone woman by the water, always at night, always silent until you saw her. Some describe her dress as tattered, tore at the edges as if it had been in the river for years. Others said her eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight, though no one ever got close enough to be certain. One man swore she beckoned him, lifting a hand and curling her fingers slowly as if to call him into the river. He ran, but his brother, who stayed behind, claimed the water rippled in strange patterns long after she vanished, circles forming and spreading as though something heavy had slipped beneath the surface. The most chilling part of the legend came later. As more stories piled up, locals began to notice a pattern. The woman didn't always sing. Sometimes she was silent, standing still at the bend, waiting. But if she sang, really sang, then things turned deadly. They called it the rule of 3. If you heard her sing once, you were being warned. Twice, you were being marked. And 3 times, that was the end. Because according to legend, if you hear her sing 3 separate times, you won't leave the forest alive. Several disappearances in the late 90s were quietly tied to this rule. Campers who claimed they heard strange music one night, then vanished without a trace days later. Authorities chalked it up to drowning accidents, but locals whispered otherwise. One of the most disturbing accounts came from a retired trapper who lived nearby. He said he saw the woman one foggy evening while checking his lines. But unlike others, he didn't run from his canoe. He claimed he watched her glide along the surface of the river without moving her feet. Her dress floated out behind her as if she were underwater, though she remained above it, and though her hair covered her face. He said he could feel her eyes on him. When she began to hum, he froze. He described it as the most beautiful yet horrifying sound he'd ever heard. It felt like it was inside my head, he told a neighbor years later, like she was humming through me. The man said he never returned to the river again. Even in recent years, sightings continue. In 2017, a group of college students camping near the bend reported waking up to splashing in the water. When they looked, they saw a pale figure standing in the river, facing away. One student, trying to be brave, called out. The woman turned. And though they couldn't see her face clearly, all four of them swore they saw something hanging from her mouth, like strands of riverweed, long and black, dripping into the water. She raised her hand and pointed at them. They didn't wait to see what happened next. Theories range from the supernatural to the tragic. Some believe she was once a mother who drowned herself and her children in the river decades ago, doomed to wander the bend forever. Others think she's something older, tied to native legends about water spirits who lure travelers to their deaths. But no matter the explanation, one thing is certain: no one camps at that river bend twice. Even those who scoff at ghost stories admit the place feels wrong after dark. Too quiet, too heavy, like the river itself is watching. So, what is the woman at the river bend? A grieving spirit? A lure for something darker? Or just a shared hallucination of people lost in the woods? The truth is, you don't have to believe in her for her story to matter, because the locals still believe. And they'll tell you the same thing every time. If you hear singing by the water after midnight, don't listen, don't look, and whatever you do, don't go near the bend. There's a campground tucked deep inside northern Michigan's forests. By day, it looks ordinary. Rusty picnic tables, fire rings full of ash, and trails winding off into the trees. Families have come here for decades, and locals say it was once a busy weekend getaway. But at night, the campground becomes something else entirely, because after sunset, the forest around it goes quiet. Too quiet. No crickets, no owls, not even the distant rustle of wind through the trees. Just a heavy silence that presses against your chest and makes you feel like you shouldn't be there at all. They call it the silent campground, and those who stayed the night carry stories that are hard to explain. The first widely known story comes from the summer of 2001, when a group of teenagers decided to camp there for the weekend. They were loud, rowdy, and didn't believe in ghost stories. The first night went fine: music, laughter, the smell of grilled hot dogs. But the second night, things changed. Around 10 p.m., one of them noticed how quiet it had gotten. The woods had gone completely still. No bugs, no night birds, not even the buzz of mosquitoes they've been swatting all day. Then they realized something stranger. Their voices didn't echo, not against the trees, not across the empty campground. It was like the forest swallowed every word the moment it left their mouths. That's when panic set in. One kid swore he saw a figure standing at the far end of the clearing, tall, pale, and motionless. No one else dared look long enough to confirm it. By sunrise, their campsite was abandoned. They left everything: tents, food, even wallets, scattered on the ground. Rangers found it the next day, but the teenagers were gone. Eventually, they turned up back in town, shaken and unwilling to talk about what had happened. A retired park ranger once shared his own chilling experience with the campground. He said he'd been assigned to patrol the area one autumn evening after reports of trespassers. As soon as he stepped into the clearing, the silence hit him. He radioed for backup, but the radio only produced static, not weak signal, not interference, just dead, broken static that screeched in his ear. Then he noticed the smell. Damp, like old wood rotting underwater, mixed with something metallic. He compared it to the smell of blood. That was when he saw movement. At the tree line, dozens of shadowy shapes. Not people, not animals. Just vague outlines standing still among the trunks. as if they were waiting for him to leave. The ranger left, and in his own words, he never set foot there again. In 2007, a father and his 2 sons camped there for a weekend of fishing. The boys played with sticks, threw rocks into the fire pit, and laughed late into the evening. But sometime after midnight, the father woke up to complete silence. He called out to his boys, but his voice felt muted, like he was underwater. Even stranger, when he tried to wake them, they wouldn't respond. Their eyes were open, but their faces were blank. For nearly half an hour, he shook them, shouted at them, even splashed water on their faces. But nothing. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the sound of the forest returned. Crickets chirped, a breeze rustled the leaves, and his sons blinked confused, asking why he looked so scared. To this day, he swears they weren't asleep. They were awake, but not there. Another camper reported setting up alone on a cool September evening. Around midnight, he heard the crunch of footsteps circling his tent. Slow, deliberate steps that moved closer each time. When he finally burst out of the tent with a flashlight, the clearing was empty. No tracks in the dirt, no broken twigs. Just stillness. But here's where it gets worse. The man had been recording voice memos on his phone throughout the trip. Later, when he played them back, he found something chilling. On the recording taken around midnight, there was no sound of footsteps. Instead, there was only silence. Thick, absolute silence, except for one faint whisper at the very end. It said his name. Locals claimed the land wasn't always cursed. In fact, the campground was popular through the 70s and 80s. But in the early 90s, something shifted. Several families reported missing time. Whole hours vanishing overnight with no memory of what had happened. Equipment failed. Campfires wouldn't stay lit. Radios cut out without warning. There was even a story about a young girl who wandered off into the woods and returned hours later, completely silent. For weeks afterward, she wouldn't speak to anyone, only staring blankly at the walls of her room. When she finally did speak, she said something that made her parents move away immediately. The woods told me not to come back. A strange rule has formed among those who know about the silent campground. If the woods go quiet, you leave immediately. No waiting, no investigating, no trying to see something. The silence itself is the warning, because as the stories go, if you stay too long after the sound dies, the forest notices you, and once it does, it doesn't let you go easily. Even today, occasional campers post online about unsettling experiences there. Phones losing power at the exact same moment. GPS trackers freezing on their screens. Groups waking up at exactly the same time in the middle of the night, each claiming they heard someone whisper right outside their tent. One hiker even wrote that he felt the silence follow him home. For weeks after camping there, he'd wake up in the middle of the night to a total lack of sound. No hum of appliances, no distant traffic. Just the same oppressive quiet he'd felt in the woods. He eventually moved states, hoping it would stop. So, what is happening at the silent campground? Is it something natural, a bizarre acoustic phenomenon, magnetic fields, or wildlife patterns we just don't understand? Or is it something else entirely? Something watching, something waiting, something that takes sound because it doesn't want to be found. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain. If you ever find yourself in those Michigan woods and the forest suddenly goes still, don't stay. Don't wait to see what happens. Because silence isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it's a warning. The forest has always been a place of mystery, somewhere between beauty and danger, calm and chaos. But as these stories show, it can also be a place where the line between the natural and the supernatural completely disappears. So now I'll ask you, would you still go camping after hearing these stories? Or would you keep the woods at a safe distance? Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you enjoyed these tales, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more chilling stories, and hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. And remember, next time you're out in the wild, if the woods go quiet, if you hear footsteps that aren't yours, or the air suddenly shifts, don't ignore it. Because sometimes the scariest part of the forest is what you can't see.